Good morning and welcome back to Al Jazeera America. I'm Thomas Drayden. Following our top story this morning, another tragic shooting at Fort Hood military post. A man identified as Army Specialist Ivan Lopez shot and killed 3 soldiers on Wednesday. He later died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. At least 16 other people were injured. Wednesday's shooting comes after 2009's deadly attack that killed 13 people. Army officials say the gunman was receiving treatment for depression and anxiety. He was also being evaluated for post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The incident is raising new questions about mental health among veterans. Dr. Devi is a physician and associate professor at New York University's Langone Medical Center. She's joining us from New Orleans this morning. So good to have you with us this morning. We hear more and more about post-traumatic stress disorder. I have someone in my family suffering from PTSD, and it took me several years to fully understand that disorder. I don't think people understand exactly what we're dealing with here.
Well, I think part of the reason is because there's such a stigma attached with mental illness. So people don't want to come forward right away. I mean, for post-traumatic stress disorder, the key is somebody has to have experienced a trauma. So some type of traumatic event where they felt like their life was in danger. Now, a lot of us may have something like that. Let's say we've been in a car accident or something else, and we might get better. But if you keep re-experiencing that event, if you have nightmares, if you have different intrusive thoughts, if you're not quite the same person afterwards, then you might actually have post-traumatic stress disorder.
And that's PTSD. They're actively reliving that experience. We understand that Ivan Lopez, was being evaluated for PTSD. What is the evaluation process?
Well, it's very difficult, actually. So you can ask people questions about whether they have those intrusive thoughts, whether they have nightmares, whether they feel claustrophobic. But the symptoms can be different in different people, and also they're very subjective. So there's no test like an MRI or some other type of X-ray where you can find an answer, like with some physical problems. I mean, a lot of the issues with mental illness are that we're relying on people to tell us things, but they may not know exactly what is important to reveal. And at the same time, you know, they may leave out important things because they don't want to share that. They're worried about their job opportunities or other things.
So there's no test, there's no X-ray. How do you determine a person has PTSD over another mental illness?
Well, in this case, for example, you know, this person had a couple different diagnoses. So first they thought that maybe he had an anxiety disorder, maybe he had depression. So a lot of times post-traumatic stress disorder goes along with other things. It's in a spectrum of anxiety disorder. So people tend to be very alarmed, alert. They are aware of a lot of different things that happen. Sometimes they get startled easily. So you get a sense of whether the person might have PTSD from their anxiety symptoms, and then you look a little bit further. Was there a traumatic event? And sometimes you can do what's called neuropsychological testing. So that's basically, it's an evaluation, but it involves a ton of questions trying to figure out what exactly is the source of anxiety. Is the anxiety normal, or is it out of proportion to the event? And then you kind of go down that path to figure it out. I mean, the other thing in this case is that there are some other things that can look like post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. I mean, they thought perhaps he might have had a brain injury. I mean, there are a couple things that can look similar, so it is difficult to tease it out.
You had mentioned people coming forward seeking out treatment. We know about 30% of the men and women who have spent time in war zones experience PTSD. Do you think that number is low? Are people, men and women, actually coming forward?
Well, I think for veterans, they may come forward a little bit more than other people because the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, actually has good resources. So does the military to treat mental illness. So in some cases, people may come forward a little bit more because there are a lot of treatment options. But at the same time, let's think about what veterans do afterwards. A lot of them go into law enforcement or other areas. So that's the natural training for the condition, you know, for the... But at the same time, if they're doing that, then they might not want to reveal that they have post-traumatic stress disorder.
And quickly, are there any mandated mental evaluations for U.S. soldiers?
People do have evaluations when they come back. They also have evaluations when they get transferred to the veterans. Those things are mandated, but because they have to reveal the symptoms, you may not be able to diagnose them if they don't want to be diagnosed.
We'll certainly be learning more about Ivan Lopez and post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Devi joining us from New York University's Langone Medical Center. Certainly appreciate your time this morning.